a follow-up to part 2 of my Arima 386SX computer that's made by ACT and that was brutally handled by the Norwegian Postal Service. And thanks for leaving me questions, but please leave some comments below the video as well, so that people can take part in this discussion. I will try to answer the question that is come to me direct, but as I said, it's better to leave this as a community thing where others can also participate in this kind of discussions. But as I said, I will try to sort out the question that was come to me from other channels. And also, some of this information should have been in the last video, of course. So this was some footage that was taken, or some of the pictures was taken during the time I filmed the part 2, but they was not in the final video. So apologies for that, and I will take you through this. There will be no new videos of this, but I will go through and explain some of the theory behind this, and also try to not make it as boring as I can. So please stay along, and please leave a comment if you wish on the video. In my last video there was some things I didn't show you, and that is because it's very difficult to actually make some good footage and film when it comes to these old LCD panels and stuff where I don't have any way of capturing the video or system. So I did have to just take static pictures of each of the menus so that I had anything to show you, but I didn't at that point think it would add anything to the video. But as I was getting some questions and digging deeper into this, I saw that this actually did have a value at all. So that's why I've give you this presentation now of what we actually see. And this computer do have an advanced CMOS setup, and it was not usual to have that back in the day, but this actually has it. And they go quite into some detail for configuration, this chipset. And this is what you see when you get into the extended CMOS setup program, and some of these things are really strange. Because everything that is inside this red square here is not configurable, and we do have some strange stuff in here. This 1 meg DRAM type, anything else I change, I can change this wherever I want. It doesn't change this fact that is presented here as 1 meg. And also the bank, it's 2 bank zeros, and one is enabled and one is disabled. That could be a typo, that this should be bank 1. I hope it is, otherwise this makes no sense at all. And since our computer only have 4 memory sockets, and that you need 2 DIMMs to make a bank on this setup with 16 bits plus 2 parity bits. So the 2 and 3 banks is not included on the system. But that leaves us with a maximum of 4 megabytes. And not 8 that you would have if you have all the banks. But that's just how things are. This you can configure, the wait states, and you can configure this clock interleave that is derived from the processor clock. You can actually change, and you can also go into here and change some of the shadow settings for these memory positions. Further on, you do have an advanced neat chipset register setup. And this is where things get more complicated and a bit harder both to explain and to show and to experiment with. And this certainly does not make good video if I should show you every experimental task I did complete in here. Because this is what you see in this extended CMOS setup. And in normal BIOSes, they have done everything they can to prevent you from seeing things like this. Because in the back of things, there is always some bits that configure things that you are changing. But here, you only see the bits. And you do have some explanation down here that describe what each of these bits as you scroll through are. But there really is no easy way of knowing everything of this just by looking at these numbers. And each of these sections of this table refers to one of the system main chips here, the 286, the 812, that is a 212 on this motherboard, but the 2 and the 8 series is actually the same chips. There are some speed changes and some other stuff with the newer designations, but otherwise they're exactly the same. So this register relates to the 811 or 211, and this is to the 212, and this is to the 206. And to go into details of this, all the systems from the 90s, it's not possible to get the service manual, it's not possible to get some schematics, it's really hard to know anything. So you do have to go back to the source. And the source for this is actually that the people that gave out the generic chipsets and sold those, they have these implementation manuals that are quite good and actually gives you at least an overview of how the system is working. What they do for other special chips and how they control the buses, how the latches is implemented and stuff that you should surround with glue logic and 74 series of chips, that is no way of knowing, but at least you do have a good understanding of how the chipset itself is working. And that is actually what we are going to do here. We are going to look into the data sheets so that we can get an explanation of some of these gibberish numbers that's written here in this table. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to start with looking through the schematics. And here is where it gets a bit complicated, or really not, but the great understanding here to be able to grasp the concept of this chipset and the advanced CMOS setup relationship is to see what we actually have here. And this is the data sheet for the 82C211, 212 and 215 chips. It's not including the 206 chip. We take that afterwards. But the block diagram and these chips is enough to make a complete AT computer, and everything that is referenced in this sheet is about the 286. But as I said in my last video, the 286 and the 386SX is almost exactly the same when it comes to the buses and the control logic that you need. So the 386SX was developed as a plug-in replacement for the 286 to grow the 386 market from the bottom. So everything that's related there to 286 will also count for a 386. And they state here that this chipset was able to make that with only 28 logic components plus memory and processor or the CPU, you would be able to make a complete AT computer. We won't go any detail of the block diagram here, but as you can see, these 4 chips are essential components in the system, and they pack a lot of the logic that was in the earlier chipsets into just these 4 chips. And they go into quite a detail about what packaging, and they also describe every pin and every output signal of these chips. And this is the 211 that we are still going through here. Yeah, now they have moved to the 212. So we are going just to scroll past some of this, and the 212 is the one that has the DRAM and memory interface. And that is an important knowledge. And when we are finished with the pins here, we come to a bit more description here about what is what. The 211 is the bus controller, and it really makes the system go by with generating clocks and the AT bus signal. And you can see what kind of chips this is replacing. It also describes that you can have various kinds of clock signals to clock your computer, and that is also in accordance with keeping things AT compatible, because you know that you have to be in specification for the about 8 MHz for the AT bus. And they of course make some timings and other quite interesting things if you are into the design of early computer designs with, before things started to get complicated when all the buses should be serial buses. And also in the 8211 is the circuit to interface to the numeric coprocessor, the 8287. So that is also incorporated here. And let's just scroll down to the important point for us here is configuration registers. And you can see here that you have some control registers for the 82C211. And this corresponds with what we do have in our advanced BIOS. You can see here that they are indexed 60, 61 and 62 hex. And that is described, if you look over to the left, you can see this on the top of the table that we have there. So this control register is actually mirrored for the functionality of these chips. And here they state what register does what. And in our table to the left, we do have this the same way with the most significant bit to the left. So the register 60 describes some timers, some non-maskable interrupts, there are some reserved pins, and it also controls the CPU reset line. And on the 61 you have the 80 bus IO command delay, and this is to make things compatible with XT and AT. They do have a delay on this bus, and they also have the 8-bit and 16-bit delay, and this is some settings that you can use to increase the speed of the bus and still keep some compatibility. This is quite advanced configuration. And the last register on this chip is the 62 hex, and here you can see what the bus clock should be in accordance to the normal clock. Should it be divided in 4, 2, or should it be the AT clock? And you also have the wait state 80 cycle described here, how many wait states you should have for generation of the output register for the 80 bus. And bits 6 and 7 is reserved. And as you look over to our table to the left, you can see that RR is the registers that's reserved. And we can quite quickly now go down to the 212 chip, and this is the page interleave and EMS memory controller, and this is quite advanced. This chip can also handle EMS, also the extended memory systems, and this has quite an advanced way of interleaving memory chips between banks and different sizes. And that makes it quite a bit complicated, because some of these things can be implemented in the electronics and some cannot. And as we only have 4 chips in our system, that is 2 banks, but this chip supports 4 banks. And that makes this interleave kind of complicated to understand, because a lot of the things that's stated here does not count when you only have bus 0 and 1 available, and at least I do think that it's bus 0 and 1 that is connected here. And here it's described in detail how this interleaving work. If you should read 1 and 1 of the data registers, or that you should read and decode more than 1 bank at a time. And of course this do have some optimization values if you do catch, precast and so on. And also the memory and timings can be a bit different, because in some modes it's faster if you can read from 1 bank and then read from 1 bank, because the delay between the cast and RAS can be shorter. So here you see how the banks could be configured and how this should be with 2-way interleave and 4-way interleave. And also the 212 chip also controls the EEPROMs for the BIOS and memory mapping for the other stuff. And it also controls the shadow memory, and shadow memory is a way to make the system go faster by copying slow EEPROMs over to memory when on startup, so that you will have a a shadow copy of your EEPROM that you can read direct from RAM and have it much faster. And it also contains some of the logic together with the 211 for refresh of the chips. And now we are going to the more interesting things, because this is the configuration registers, and as you can see, the 8012 do have a lot of these registers. And as this datasheet is for a bit earlier, not much earlier, it's just talking about some revisions earlier, there might be some differences, but I have tried to play around with all these registers, and they do seem to compute, but there are some slight differences here that we really can't explain, and that's probably due to some misconfiguration of the CMOS memory chip. We have to take a further deep dive into how the registers actually are stored on the system. But as you can see here, this is the same registers from 64 to 6F. They do contain some of the things that we know are wrong with this system. Here you have the 5 lesser bits reserved, and you do have the most significant bit is the memory controller identifier. If it's a 0, it's a 2112 chip, or 8012. It's the same chip. And this bit contains the revision numbers, and it's only a readout. And then it comes register 65, and this is for shadowing and enabling room chips around the system. And some of this is, of course, something that is valid for our system, because we both have a BIOS and we have a VGA BIOS at least on this system. And this is enabling shadow RAM for different memory segments. And really the same here. It's also different segments of the memory that can be set as shadow memory. But here you come to some things that is of more interest to us, and where we do actually have some of the mismatch on our system. And that is the bank 0 and 1 enable register. And number of banks read-write is D5, number of RAM banks used. And here you can say that, and here we state that one bank should be used. It's a 0 in the configuration that we show on our screens, but I've been playing around with these numbers, of course. And these are the bits that contain the information about the DRAM types used. As I was first visiting this computer, they had 1 megabit RAMs used, and I later changed to 256K, and I've been playing around with this, changing them, putting 1 megabits in one bank, 1 megabits in another bank, and 256K and every thinkable configuration. And you also have some strange settings here, 206K and 64K bit DRAMs used for reaching 640K, and there are some systems that are like this. You have 64K on the motherboard, and then you have some SIM sockets or some other stuff. But since our board is only SIM sockets, it's not a valid configuration. So it's either 10 or 11 that is the valid configuration for bits 6 and 7 here. And here you can say that this is for 1 megabyte chips, and all the rest of the registers are reserved. And I've been playing around with this with no noticeable change. And you can also configure RAM wait states and memory leak relocation, and that means how the memory that is above 640K should be handled, and the page interleave mode. And I've been playing around with this a lot, and since the system doesn't count to more than 446K, the EMS and other stuff is not of concern to us, but I also played around with this. But this with the number of RAM banks used and stuff is important for us. And this is the register 6C, this one. And as you can see, bits 6 and 7 tells us what memory chips are used. And I've been using both 1 megabit, 256. And I also played with these settings, but they didn't make any change. And bit 5 is the number of local RAM banks used. And you do have some way of setting that memory could be controlled by the 802 chip, and you can also have a memory that is not controlled by this chip, and that is if you have an ISA card with memory expansions, then this is not controlled by this chip at all, and you do have some special settings for that too. And this is settings for EMS, the page register. When you use EMS, you set apart a small section of memory below 1 megabit that should enable you to access windows of the EMS memory above. And I have tried to reset some settings here to default values, but to no avail so far at least. And then you have some lines that is used for the 820-bit control, and that is how the memory manager should control the memory above the 640K. And you do have some settings here that state that this is US2 optimization and so on, but this is also used by the EMN386 file on a normal MS-DOS computer, and it handles it about the same way. Yeah, and you also have some RAS timeout configuration and stuff. And this is, yeah, it doesn't matter that much, but this memory we have, I have tried to configure it in normal page mode, and it didn't make any difference. And that's everything you do have on the chips here. The 206 chip is not described in this datasheet, so I will load up that. Yeah, this is if you take a close look, you see that this is Opti and not chips, but the 82C206 is also manufactured by Opti, and Opti did have a better datasheet. The other ones I found for the 82C206 from chips was very bad scan. And it is the same chip, and this is one glue logic chip that is also used without the other chips, and that's probably why Opti and some other makers did copy this chip. Because, as you can see here in the block diagram, they actually stated which chip they replace with this. So the 8237, the DMA controllers, the wait state generation and configuration register that was handled by Glue Logic, and the 8215EA and for interrupt controller, and the 8254 timer counting. The real-time clock chip is actually replaced with this chip. So this is some of the glue logic that was used on XT, on the AT, and they are all integrated in this chip. And they also have the same with the registers. I just browsed through this with all the pins description and so on. And here you can see how this is integrated with the address range and how these are mapped. And this is of course a copy of the original 8286 function diagram and memory mapping. And the 8286 only have one register, and you can see here that this is the index 01 hex. And the settings for bit 6 and 7 is 11 and default, and that is the same we have on our system, and that is read-write states. And this should not make anything not working, it should only make things slower and possibly more stable if you increase the wait states. Bits 4 and 5, it's the memory wait states when we do 16 megabit DMA memory transfers, not of great interest to us. And this is bit 2 and 3 is for 8-bit DMA transfer, and that is direct memory access, and that is when other chips than the CPU uses the data bus to copy things. There are some compatibility issues where you can set this to mimic things from an early PC-80 system, and I don't think it is of concern to us. And the same with the read-write on the system clock. How they should be handling it's only a timing issue. And that is really the registers we do have in here. And to be fair, I've done a deep dive into this and checked a lot of settings. And I think I have exhausted the power switch quite much on this, but the problem seems to be that there are some garbage value written to some of these registers, and that the rest of the BIOS cannot handle that. And I've tried to desolder the battery and leave the battery without power for over the night, and I'm come back and try to set these things, and it's the same. And I've tried to solder in the battery and set them, and it's the same. And that is that there are some inconsistency in how this is written, because I can write these registers and set things that I want, but the main BIOS page still shows things wrong. So I don't know, but this is as far as I get in this video, and hopefully you will have learned something about the advanced CMOS setup and what you are really doing, and how the advanced CMOS setups today differ from the old one is that this is made into readable texts and not just some cryptic bit value registers. Yeah, and just to wrap up this in a hurry, there are some final comments on the BIOS settings and their impact on the real life of these machines. And you can see here what is marked with red here. This is not changing whatever I do with this system. The purple here is always 64K, even though it counts up to 446 kilobyte. And that does not change with the settings in the BIOS. And this green section appears to be working and changing as it should. And I am able to change the CMOS settings on the floppy drive and other stuff, and that appears to be working as it should as well. And all the CMOS BIOS data in this is stored in the 82C206 chip, as far as I know. At least the possibility exists, because this is where the CMOS memory is stored. And this is because the real-time clock circuitry is in the 82C206. And they could of course have sold this by some other means, but I can't find any other chips that contains static memory on this board. And this is of course again connected to an external circuit that monitors power and also provides the battery connection to this, and this is connected to these pins here on the circuit. And this measures fine. I can find battery power here, and the battery works just fine. And as you remember, we replaced the battery. But what could be wrong? There could be some internal fault on these registers. There could of course be some damage on the circuit board itself. It can be that if we are able to do a good reset of the 82C206, things might get better. But this is a bit complicated, because there is a certain procedure to reset everything in this CMOS memory, and that involves the test and this strobe signal. And I have not bothered to look further into this, because this has taken lots and lots of time. And I do think I have answered every one of the questions that I got with this video. So please leave a comment if you want me to try something else. But until then, I just pack this back in a plastic container, put it back on a shelf and leave it there. So thanks for watching. Hope to see you again in my next episode. Hopefully that will be coming along just in a couple of days. So thanks for watching. See you in the next one.